and thank you for joining us on this Friday. We begin in Anchorage, Alaska, where right now President Trump and his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin are in hour 3 of that closed-door meeting. Today's talks mark the first time President Putin has traveled to the U.S. in nearly a decade. And this is the 7th time those two world leaders have met face-to-face, but the first since Trump's return to the White House. It is also the first with a U.S. president since Putin launched his full-scale invasion of Ukraine. The goal for Trump? Making progress on ending Europe's first major war since World War II. Now, in the days leading up to this, Russian forces breached Ukrainian defenses. This was near the key industrial region of Donetsk. Ukraine's President Zelensky is warning that Putin may be trying to give the impression that Russia's moving forward and Ukraine is losing ground. In the hours leading up to the summit, President Zelensky delivered an address saying Ukraine is ready to work productively toward bringing an end to the war. He also emphasized Ukraine is counting on a strong position from the United States. And right now, we are awaiting a joint press conference between those two leaders. Both Trump and Putin are expected to talk about their meeting before taking questions from the press. We have team coverage on this story. CBS News White House reporter Willie James Inman is in Alaska, and CBS News national security contributor Samantha Vinograd is in Washington. Willie, I'm going to start with you, though. What have you learned about President Trump's conversations with Putin thus far?
Hey there, Nancy. Good to be with you. Well, the two leaders have been speaking behind closed doors for a couple of hours now, and we're learning that what the original plan was for a one-on-one meeting with just only translators with both men in the room turned into a 3-on-3 meeting. That includes the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio. It also includes Steve Witkoff, the president's envoy, as well. So that conversation expanded. We're learning that they're going to have a working lunch later with more officials in the room to hash out details of what President Trump wants, a ceasefire in Ukraine. We, of course, know that that is something that President Zelensky, other European leaders want as well. But the president, ahead of his conversation and meeting with Putin here in Alaska, said that he's not negotiating for Ukraine and that any potential land deal, as he mentioned a couple of weeks ago, any land swap is not up to him, that is ultimately up to the Ukrainians. But this welcoming ceremony with President Putin was a show of force by this president. You had a military jet fly over right over the head of President Putin and President Trump as they walked along that red carpet there for a photo op. We'll have to wait and see in terms of how this meeting turns out. But a big show of how it turns out is if both men show up for that press conference tonight, because President Trump has said that if this meeting didn't turn out the way that he wanted, that he would essentially just go back home and say, hey, good luck. So we'll have to wait and see in terms of who shows up for that press conference, if it's President Trump alone or if both men stand there and take questions, Nancy.
Yeah, it's really interesting, really, just to kind of guess at what's happening behind those closed doors right now. There was that sense that President Trump had said that he would be able to tell within the first couple of minutes if this was a successful meeting. What does it mean you think that we're now going into hour 3?
Yeah, it certainly means that they are having a substantive conversation. There's no shortage of things to talk about, including the situation in Ukraine, but also increased economic ties. Remember, President Putin is under those tough sanctions, the threat of those tougher sanctions that President Trump announced. He would perhaps want some closer ties with the U.S., and one way to stave off that is to work out a situation moving towards peace there in Ukraine, Nancy.
All right, Willie James Inman, thank you very much. We'll check in with you later. And CBS News national security contributor Samantha Vinograd joins us now. Sam, when we look at this, what does this moment mean for potential progress to really be made between Russia and the United States and on Ukraine specifically?
Well, let's look at this from Russia's perspective. Russia is suffering an economic slowdown in light of pretty severe economic sanctions since their 2 invasions of Ukraine in 2014 and 2022. There are sanctions on Russian oil exports, which account for about 1/3 of their budget revenues, and there are a range of sanctions on investment in Russia, export controls, and more. What Russia has to gain here is an opening to enhance bilateral economic ties with the United States, to remove sanctions, export controls, and to put more oil on global markets to help boost its economy. At the same time, Russia is hoping to gain at least tacit approval from President Trump to agree to some of Russia's security demands, like Ukraine never joining NATO, like the United States not allowing Ukraine to use U.S. long-range weapons to attack Russia, and getting Donald Trump's tacit approval that Russia can hold on to at least some of the territory that it seized in this war. So from President Putin's perspective, he likely has a very clear set of objectives for this meeting, while President Trump is hoping to walk away with some sort of signal that Putin is committed to some kind of a ceasefire.
Well, if the goal is a ceasefire, not perhaps from this initial meeting, but maybe that second meeting that President Trump has talked about with Zelensky at the table, if that goal is a ceasefire, at the same time, Russia is launching a new advance breaching parts of Ukraine's defenses we just talked about in eastern Ukraine in recent days. So where exactly does the war stand right now?
Well, the war stands at a horrific point. We have almost 1 million casualties suffered, huge losses on both sides, scores of Ukrainian children illegally abducted from Ukraine, taken into Russia. President Putin has committed war crimes. The litany of horrific incidents goes on. Russia is likely continuing their onslaught as these negotiations between the U.S. and Russia were about to start to show leverage and to show that it can and will continue what is really a war of attrition at this point to try to hold on to territory and perhaps get more. So we shouldn't expect Russia to stop fighting just because they're about to negotiate with Trump. And last point, Nancy, that I'll note is any ceasefire is not the same as a good, incredible ceasefire arrangement. President Putin knows that Trump wants to make a deal, but for the security of Ukraine, the security of Europe, and to ensure that Putin doesn't feel emboldened, it needs to be a good, credible deal with security guarantees to forestall any further Russian incursions in Ukraine, in Europe, and around the world.
Well, then specifically on that point, Sam, what would you be watching for in the days and the weeks ahead that might show some real progress coming out of this summit?
I'll be looking for a conversation between Putin and Zelensky and some sort of outline of a ceasefire arrangement that would include security guarantees by the United States and European allies.
All right, Sam Vinograd, thank you very much. We appreciate your insight.
Thanks.
In a programming note, we will have special coverage of the press briefing between those two leaders there in Alaska. It is set to take place after their meeting wraps. We saw some flurry of activity just now. We'll bring that to you live, though, when it does start right here on CBS News.